Vitals are stabilizing. Stay with me, Commander. We're almost there.
The heart monitor let out a steady, indifferent beep. Step away from the patient. The voice was sharp. Command-trained. Used to obedience. Lieutenant Commander Harris didn't look up from the chart. With respect, sir, I can't do that. The room went still. 2 Marines standing near the wall shifted their weight. Boots against tile. A subtle scrape. Rear Admiral Marcus Vale lay motionless in the hospital bed. Oxygen cannula in place. Eyes closed. Face pale beneath the fluorescent lights. He is under restricted observation, the senior physician snapped. Colonel Whitaker's jaw flexed. You are not cleared for direct neurological stimulus testing. Harris kept her hands steady on the rail of the bed. His pupils reacted. Whitaker stepped closer. Too close. That's impossible. They constricted to voice, she said quietly. Silence. Then a dismissive scoff. You're a junior nurse practitioner, Whitaker said, voice low but edged with steel. This is a 4-star flag officer. You don't get to rewrite the diagnosis because you want to feel important. Across the glass wall, 2 uniformed officers were watching. Ribbons. Silver oak leaves. Faces unreadable. Harris swallowed but didn't move. With respect, sir, she repeated. He responded. Whitaker's eyes hardened. The Admiral has been in a confirmed coma for 72 hours. Neurology has signed off. So unless you outrank an entire department, I don't, she cut in. The Colonel's eyebrows lifted at the interruption. But I know what I saw. The heart monitor kept beeping. Steady. Unbothered. Whitaker turned to the corpsman near the door. Escort her out. The corpsman hesitated. That hesitation was enough. Harris leaned closer to the Admiral's face. Sir, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. If you can hear me, squeeze my hand. Whitaker grabbed her wrist before she could take his. That is enough. His grip wasn't violent. It didn't need to be. Authority did the work. You are out of line, Lieutenant Commander. The Marine straightened. The tension thickened. Harris looked down at the Admiral's hand. Still. Whitaker released her wrist and stepped back, smoothing his uniform. You're relieved from this case pending review. Pack your things. There it was. Public. Final. A young nurse in a room full of rank she couldn't challenge. Harris nodded once. Professional. Controlled. But as she turned toward the door, she felt it. A pressure. Faint. Against her palm. She froze. The monitor didn't change. No alarms. No spike. Just a barely perceptible tightening of fingers that were supposed to be lifeless. And when she looked back at the Admiral's face, she could have sworn his breathing had shifted. The pressure vanished as quickly as it came. Harris didn't move. Not at first. Her training told her not to react to anomalies without confirmation. Her instincts told her she hadn't imagined it. Behind her, Colonel Whitaker was already speaking to someone through the glass. Calm. Controlled. The way senior officers spoke when they believed the situation was contained. Lieutenant Commander, he said without turning, you're dismissed. Dismissed. The word carried more weight than the room. Harris straightened. Yes, sir. She stepped back from the bed. Her posture was perfect. Shoulders square. Chin level. Years of Navy protocol drilled into muscle memory. Rear Admiral Marcus Vale remained motionless. One of the most decorated surface warfare officers in the fleet. A man whose decisions had moved carrier groups across oceans. Now he lay silent in a secure wing of Bethesda Naval Hospital. Outside the glass, 2 captains murmured to each other. Intelligence pins. Submarine warfare insignia. Not casual observers. This wasn't just a medical case. It was a controlled environment. Harris exited the room without looking back. The hallway lights were harsh. White. Clinical. Security cameras fixed at every junction. 2 armed MPs stood near the elevators. No visitors without clearance. Word traveled fast in places like this. By the time she reached the nurse's station, Petty Officer Alvarez was already pretending not to stare. You okay, ma'am? He asked quietly. I'm fine. He glanced toward the Admiral's room. That's the third neurologist who signed off on him. I know. Colonel Whitaker doesn't miss things. I know, she repeated. But she also knew what a voluntary muscle contraction felt like. She'd done combat rotations with the Marines in Fallujah as a field medic before commissioning. She'd seen real neurological shutdown. Seen bodies that didn't come back. This didn't feel like that. A shadow fell across the desk. Captain Reardon. Hospital Command Liaison. Uniform crisp. Eyes assessing. Walk with me, he said. No anger. No warmth either. Just rank. They moved down the corridor together. Their steps echoed in sync. You embarrassed a senior physician, Reardon said without looking at her. I reported a clinical observation. You challenged him. In front of staff. Yes, sir. He stopped near a secured access door. Swiped his badge. It clicked open, but he didn't enter. You understand who's upstairs. Rear Admiral Vale. Beyond the rank. She didn't answer. Reardon studied her face for a long moment. The Admiral collapsed during a classified briefing. Half the Joint Chiefs were present. Within an hour, this wing was locked down. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. There are people in Washington who need him incapacitated right now. And people who need him conscious. The words hung there. Not a threat. A fact. You suggesting something, sir? She asked carefully. I'm suggesting you tread lightly. They stood in silence. Then he continued. The official diagnosis is catastrophic neurological event. No brainstem response. No voluntary movement. Clean scans. I've reviewed the scans. And they're consistent, she said. Consistent, he echoed. But incomplete. That earned a pause. Reardon's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. You're not neurology, he said. No, sir. You're trauma. Yes, sir. Then stay in your lane. There it was again. Hierarchy. Specialization. Control. She held his gaze. With respect, sir, lanes don't matter if a patient is conscious. Reardon's jaw tightened. You're relieved from primary access to that room, he said evenly. Effective immediately. He swiped his badge again, sealing the door. You'll rotate to surgical recovery until further notice. A demotion without paperwork. Yes, sir. As he walked away, Harris felt the weight of the building settle around her. Every hallway carried echoes of rank. Brass plaques. Portraits of admirals lining the walls. Names engraved beneath medals. This institution did not tolerate disruption. And yet, that pressure in her palm hadn't felt accidental. Later that night, in surgical recovery, she checked vitals on a Marine recovering from abdominal surgery. Monitors hummed. Antiseptic air. Routine. Safe. But her mind kept replaying the moment. The timing. The squeeze had come after Whitaker ordered her removal. Not before. Not random. Responsive. Across the ward, a television played muted cable news. A headline ticker crawled across the bottom. Senior naval leader hospitalized amid ongoing strategic review. No mention of coma. No mention of neurological collapse. Just vague language. Carefully chosen. Alvarez approached quietly. Ma'am, he said under his breath, they moved additional security to the Admiral's floor. How many? For more MPs. And a civilian detail. Civilian. That wasn't medical. That's unusual, he added. Yes, she said softly. It was. She finished charting and removed her gloves. Her reflection stared back at her in the stainless steel cabinet. Young for her rank. 32. Combat ribbon. Navy Commendation Medal. Earned, not gifted. She wasn't reckless. She wasn't emotional. And she wasn't wrong. Somewhere 3 floors above, a 4-star admiral lay in a bed surrounded by authority, secrecy, and men who believed the case was closed. But when she closed her eyes, she could still feel it. A deliberate tightening of fingers. Not a reflex. A choice. And in the Navy, choices carried consequences. The reassignment came before sunrise. No meeting. No formal notice. Just a printed schedule taped to the board. Lieutenant Commander Harris, surgical recovery, night rotation. 12-hour shifts. No access to ICU clearance zones. Alvarez avoided eye contact as she read it. They moved your locker, he muttered. Where? Basement storage. Of course they did. Harris didn't react. She took the paper down, folded it once, and slid it into her pocket. Around her, the morning staff pretended to focus on clipboards and screens. Whispers travel differently in military hospitals. They don't sound like gossip. They sound like caution. By 0800, the rumor had shape. She had overstepped. Challenged a colonel. Questioned neurology in front of command. In the break room, 2 civilian nurses went silent when she entered. One of them adjusted her scrubs and left without finishing her coffee. Harris poured her own. Black. No sugar. When she turned, Colonel Whitaker was standing in the doorway. He didn't raise his voice. Walk with me, Lieutenant Commander. Not optional. They moved down the main corridor. Peak traffic hour. Corpsmen. Surgeons. Administrative officers. The sound of rubber soles against polished tile. Whitaker stopped at the central nurses' station, the most visible point on the floor. He didn't lower his voice. Clinical integrity matters here, he said. Chain of command matters more. Conversations slowed around them. You created confusion in a restricted case. I reported a response. You implied incompetence. I did not. He took one step closer. Close enough that only she could hear the next part. There are careers above you tied to that diagnosis. Then, louder again, you will submit a written clarification acknowledging that no confirmed voluntary response occurred. It wasn't a request. Staff were watching now. A surgical resident paused mid-chart. An ensign froze near the supply cart. Public correction. Controlled humiliation. Harris kept her hands at her sides. I can document that I cannot medically confirm it, she said evenly. Whitaker's jaw tightened. You will state it did not occur. Silence. She didn't blink. I won't falsify observations, sir. There it was. A line drawn. Whitaker exhaled slowly through his nose. You are on probationary review pending conduct evaluation. A few heads lowered immediately. The message was clear. Defiance carries weight. Whitaker stepped back. Return to your assigned rotation. He walked away without looking back. The station buzzed again, but quieter now. Controlled. Alvarez approached carefully. Ma'am, I'm fine. But her locker had been moved. Her clearance restricted. Her name circulated in tones usually reserved for disciplinary hearings. By afternoon, it escalated. She was called to a departmental meeting. Conference room B, glass walls. Long polished table. Command insignias on the far wall. Captain Reardon sat at the head. Whitaker to his right. 2 additional physicians. A legal officer from JAG. Not standard procedure for a miscommunication. Harris stood at attention until told to sit. Reardon folded his hands. We're addressing yesterday's incident. It was not an incident, she said calmly. Whitaker didn't hide his irritation this time. You initiated unauthorized neurological testing. I asked a patient to squeeze my hand. In a restricted condition. In a monitored room. In violation of attending authority. The legal officer scribbled notes. Reardon spoke next. The Admiral's status is under federal review. Any deviation from official findings introduces liability. Liability to who, sir? The question hung in the air. Whitaker leaned forward. You are not cleared to ask that. There it was again. Not medical. Not procedural. Political. Reardon's tone hardened. You will cease discussion of voluntary response claims. You will not speak to media. You will not discuss this with other staff. I haven't. You won't. Silence settled. Do you understand? Reardon asked. Yes, sir. He studied her face for signs of defiance. Found none. Professional mask. Perfect posture. But her hands were clasped tight enough to whiten her knuckles. Meeting adjourned. As she exited, 2 junior officers avoided her gaze. One gave the smallest sympathetic nod before looking away. No one wanted proximity to this. By nightfall, security presence doubled again. 2 civilian men in dark suits now stood outside the Admiral's floor. Not military. Not hospital staff. One of them watched her as she passed the elevator. Not casually. Measured. Her ID badge no longer granted access above level 3. She tried anyway. Red light. Access denied. A petty officer at the checkpoint cleared his throat. Orders, ma'am. I'm aware. She stepped back. From the far end of the corridor, she saw Whitaker speaking quietly to one of the suited men. Whitaker's posture was different. Not dominant. Careful. Respectful. The shift was subtle, but unmistakable. Authority flowed upward. Even colonels answered to someone. Later, in surgical recovery, she stitched a gash on a corporal's shoulder without speaking. Her movements precise. Controlled. But when the corporal winced and squeezed her wrist reflexively, her body went still. The memory flashed sharp and immediate. Deliberate pressure. Timed. Intentional. Not random. She finished the stitch and removed her gloves. At 2300, her terminal login was suspended for 15 minutes without explanation. At 23:15, it was restored. A warning. At midnight, Alvarez approached her station again. They reassigned your weekend leave, he whispered. To what? Mandatory review board observation. Of course. Isolation through procedure. Pressure through formality. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just steady compression. Like someone tightening bolts one turn at a time. When her shift ended, she passed the Admiral's floor one more time. The suited men were still there. One of them met her eyes. Held them. Unsmiling. As if measuring risk. Harris didn't slow down. But as she stepped into the elevator, she understood something clearly for the first time. This was no longer about a medical disagreement. It was about control. And somewhere 3 floors above, a man with 4 stars on his collar lay perfectly still while the entire structure around him worked overtime to keep him that way. By the 4th day, the routine felt staged. Not chaotic. Not panicked. Just rehearsed. Harris noticed it in the language first. No one said coma anymore. They said condition. They said status unchanged. They said neurological event under review. Precise. Neutral. Carefully scrubbed of permanence. She heard it during morning briefings piped through the internal system. She heard it when Whitaker updated command staff outside the glass corridor. Same phrasing. Same cadence. Scripted. In surgical recovery, life continued as if nothing hovered above them. Appendectomies. Fractures. A sailor with heat exhaustion. Routine military medicine. But every few hours, an elevator opened and someone important stepped out. Civilian shoes on hospital tile. Dark suits that didn't wrinkle. They never signed visitor logs at the public desk. They were escorted directly upstairs. On her second night shift, Harris stepped into the stairwell instead of taking the elevator. Not to trespass. Just to listen. The stairwell walls carried sound differently. Conversations bled downward through concrete. At level 5, voices murmured above her head. Low. Controlled. Timeline won't hold if he regains. The rest blurred under the hum of ventilation. She didn't move closer. Footsteps crossed overhead. Then silence. A door closed with soft hydraulics. Harris remained in the stairwell for a full minute before descending. Her face revealed nothing when she re-entered surgical recovery. At 0300, a code was called on level 4. Not for the Admiral. For a supply malfunction. Still, 2 MPs ran toward the restricted floor with more urgency than necessary. When she glanced at Alvarez, he shook his head slightly. Overreaction. Or rehearsal. The next morning, Captain Reardon addressed staff again. Short briefing. 5 minutes. Operational security remains in effect. No speculation. No discussion beyond need to know. A resident raised a tentative hand. Sir, will the Admiral be transferred to Walter Reed? Reardon paused. Negative. No explanation. Walter Reed was built for long-term neurological management. Bethesda was acute care. The decision didn't match the diagnosis. Harris kept her eyes forward. Later that afternoon, she noticed something else. The Admiral's chart, digitally restricted, had timestamp gaps. 3 separate blocks of 20 minutes each night. No entries. No vitals recorded. Impossible in ICU monitoring. She wasn't supposed to see the metadata, but trauma rotations had taught her where systems overlapped. She didn't access the file. She didn't copy anything. She simply noted the absence. Absence leaves shape. That evening, Whitaker walked through surgical recovery unexpectedly. He rarely visited lower floors. He paused near her station. Adjusting well, he asked. His tone was mild, almost conversational. Yes, sir. You're talented, Lieutenant Commander. Don't let ambition cloud judgment. She met his eyes. I don't. A beat of silence. Then he added, softer, some patients are more valuable unconscious. The words were delivered like advice, not threat. He walked away before she could respond. Across the room, a young ensign pretended not to have heard. Harris's posture didn't change, but her pulse ticked once hard. On the fifth night, rain hammered the hospital windows. A coastal storm rolling in from the Atlantic. The power flickered once. Brief. Backup generators engaged instantly. Routine. Except the Admiral's floor went dark half a second longer than the rest. Half a second. Long enough to notice if you were watching. She was. The emergency lights kicked on upstairs with a faint delay. Not a full outage. Just unsynchronized. Alvarez saw it too. His jaw tightened. Generators knew, he muttered. Yes, she said. It shouldn't have staggered. At 0217, a stretcher team moved through the corridor with unusual speed. No patient visible. Just equipment. Portable imaging. Directed upstairs. But the official briefing the next morning claimed no change in condition. No imaging mentioned. No update logged. By now, unease had spread through staff like a low fever. No one said it aloud. But conversations shortened when certain officers approached. Doors closed more often. Even the civilian nurses sensed the shift. One of them asked Harris quietly, have you ever seen this much security for a medical case? Yes, she said. When? Combat zone. The nurse swallowed. On the sixth day, Harris was summoned again. Not to a conference room. To the Admiral's floor. Her clearance badge reactivated without explanation. The elevator doors opened to a corridor quieter than before. The suited men were gone. Replaced by two naval officers in dress whites. Ceremonial. Out of place in a hospital wing. Captain Reardon waited near the glass wall. You'll conduct a standard vitals confirmation, he said. Why? Neurology wants fresh baseline documentation. Whitaker stood inside the room, arms crossed. The Admiral lay as before. Pale. Still. Machines humming. Harris entered. The air felt heavier. She approached the bed. No one else spoke. She checked pulse. Steady. Respiration. Even. Skin temperature normal. Too normal for prolonged coma. She didn't say it. Whitaker watched her hands. Reardon watched her face. When she finished, she stepped back. No observable change, she said. True. Technically. Whitaker nodded once. Reardon studied her for a long second, as if searching for something behind her eyes. Thank you, he said. She exited without looking back. In the corridor, as the door sealed shut, she caught the faintest sound. Not from the monitor. Not from machinery. From inside the room. A breath. Deeper than the measured rhythm before. She stopped walking. The naval officers at the end of the hall straightened slightly. Waiting. For what, she couldn't tell. She resumed moving. Professional. Controlled. But her thoughts sharpened. Someone was adjusting the narrative in small increments. Language softened. Records trimmed. Power flickered half a second too long. Security rotated in patterns that didn't match medical protocol. And a 4-star admiral remained perfectly still while the structure around him tightened. If this were truly a catastrophic neurological event, the process would be transparent inside military channels. Instead, it felt curated. Measured. As if the hospital itself were holding its breath. Back in surgical recovery, she washed her hands slowly, staring at the water running over her fingers. The memory of that first squeeze hadn't faded. It had become clearer. Timed. Intentional. Responsive to threat. Not random. Not reflex. Upstairs, something was being maintained. Not treated. Maintained. And the longer it continued, the more carefully everyone spoke, as if the wrong word might wake more than just a patient. The change didn't happen all at once. It slipped in through procedure. At 0600 on the 7th morning, Harris received a sealed envelope in her inbox. No return name. Just an internal routing stamp. Inside was a single line printed on hospital letterhead: Neurological Stimulus Protocol Review, 1900 hours, Level 5. No signature. No explanation. She folded the paper once and slid it into her pocket. Across the station, Alvarez watched her expression carefully. "Back upstairs?" he asked. "Looks like it." He hesitated. "That's not a punishment." "No," she said quietly. "It's not." At 1855, she stood outside the Admiral's room again. The corridor felt different tonight. Quieter. Fewer bodies. The naval officers in dress whites were gone. In their place stood a single man in civilian attire, older, silver hair, posture military despite the suit. He didn't introduce himself. He only looked at her badge. "You're the one who reported voluntary response." "Yes." He studied her face for a long moment, then nodded once and stepped aside. Inside, the room lights were dimmed lower than usual. Whitaker wasn't present. Neither was Reardon. Instead, two unfamiliar officers stood near the foot of the bed. Commander rank. Intelligence insignia. One of them spoke without preamble. "Lieutenant Commander Harris. You will conduct a standard auditory stimulus check." She didn't ask why. She approached the bed. The Admiral looked unchanged. Still. Controlled. But something in the air felt alert. Not tense. Expectant. She leaned slightly closer. "Rear Admiral Vale," she said evenly, "if you can hear me, remain still." A strange instruction. One of the intelligence officers shifted his weight almost imperceptibly. Harris continued. "I'm going to adjust your oxygen line." She reached toward the cannula and deliberately let her fingers brush the Admiral's wrist. Nothing. She adjusted the line. Stepped back. "No observable response," she reported. The officers exchanged a look. The silver-haired civilian in the doorway hadn't moved. Again, one of the commanders said. Harris stepped closer once more. This time her voice lowered half a register. "Sir," she said softly, almost conversational, "if you understand the risk, do nothing." A beat. Silence thickened. The monitor kept its steady rhythm. No spike. No tremor. But she felt it. Not a squeeze. Not pressure. Stillness. Intentional stillness. The absence of reflex. She straightened. No response. One of the officers exhaled slowly. The other gave the smallest nod toward the civilian observer. The room shifted subtly, not relaxed, but recalibrated. They weren't testing for movement. They were testing for control. As she stepped back, her eyes drifted briefly to the Admiral's eyelids. Still closed. But the muscles beneath them were not slack. They were held. Engaged. Most people in true neurological shutdown cannot sustain facial muscle control evenly over extended hours. She didn't say it. She didn't need to. The officers dismissed her without debrief. No correction. No lecture. Just a quiet, "You may return to your post." In the hallway, the silver-haired man finally spoke. "Why did you tell him to remain still?" She met his gaze. "Because if he is conscious, movement would escalate the situation. And if he isn't, then nothing changes." The man studied her carefully. "You've worked combat." "Yes." "You understand operational patience." "I understand survival." A faint crease touched the corner of his mouth. Not a smile. Recognition. "Return to duty," he said. As she walked toward the elevator, she felt something shift inside the building itself. The pressure that had once been directed at her now seemed redistributed. Later that night, her access badge remained active for Level 5. No one mentioned probation. No one asked for a written clarification. Her leave review board disappeared from the schedule. At 0200, she passed the checkpoint again. The single-suited man was back. This time, he didn't watch her like a liability. He watched her like an asset. Inside surgical recovery, Alvarez approached cautiously. They restored your clearance permanently, he whispered. I noticed. Whitaker hasn't come down all day. She didn't respond. At 0330, an internal message pinged her secure inbox. No sender listed. Maintain current posture. Do not initiate further stimulus. She read it twice. Not cease. Not deny. Maintain. The language was precise. Careful. Deliberate. Upstairs, something had changed. Not in the Admiral's condition. In the command structure around him. By dawn, word filtered quietly that a delegation from Washington had arrived overnight. No press. No announcement. Just black vehicles in the secured garage. Harris finished her shift as the sky lightened over the Chesapeake. Before leaving, she walked the stairwell again. Paused at level 5. No voices this time. Just the faint hum of ventilation and distant monitors. She rested her palm briefly against the cool concrete wall. 7 days ago, she had been publicly corrected for overstepping. Now she was being summoned without explanation, tested without briefing, and reinstated without apology. No one had said the Admiral was conscious. No one had admitted the diagnosis might be wrong. But the questions had shifted. They were no longer trying to silence her. They were observing her, measuring her. And inside that dim hospital room, a 4-star Admiral remained perfectly still while men with intelligence insignia adjusted their expectations around a junior nurse who refused to falsify what she felt. The truth hadn't surfaced, but it was no longer being buried. It was being managed. And that meant one thing. Someone upstairs knew exactly what was happening. The call came at 0412. No preamble. No formal request. Level 5. Now. Harris was already moving before the line went dead. The corridors were different this time. Not quiet. Controlled. Every door along the Admiral's floor was closed. 2 MPs stood at attention outside the main room, not relaxed but rigid ceremonial posture, not security drift. Inside, the lighting was brighter than she had ever seen it. Full overhead illumination. No dimmed corners. Whitaker stood near the monitors, face tight, hands clasped behind his back. Captain Reardon was there. The silver-haired civilian stood at the far wall. And 3 additional officers she didn't recognize, older, higher rank, silent. The Admiral lay exactly as before. Still. Eyes closed. Machine steady. But something in the room had shifted from observation to decision. Reardon turned as she entered. Lieutenant Commander Harris, he said evenly, approach. She stepped forward. Whitaker didn't look at her. Standard auditory stimulus, Reardon ordered. The room went still. Not hospital still. Command still. Harris moved to the bedside. Her pulse was steady. She leaned slightly toward the Admiral. Rear Admiral Vale, she said clearly, voice carrying just enough. This is Lieutenant Commander Harris. Silence. Monitors hummed. She felt every eye in the room on her shoulders. If you are able to hear me, she continued, calm and precise, you are in a secure medical environment. Whitaker shifted slightly. One of the unknown officers inhaled slowly. Harris placed her hand lightly against the Admiral's wrist. No squeeze this time. No test. Just contact. Her next words were deliberate. Sir, if remaining still serves your purpose, do so. The room seemed to constrict. Even the air felt tight. 3 seconds. 5. 7. Nothing. Whitaker exhaled sharply through his nose, the faintest trace of vindication beginning to return to his posture, and then it happened. Not a twitch. Not a reflex. The Admiral opened his eyes. Fully. Clear. Focused. There was no confusion in them. No haze. No neurological lag. Just awareness. Absolute and controlled. The sound in the room wasn't a gasp. It was silence collapsing inward. Whitaker took an involuntary step back. One of the MPs outside shifted hard enough that leather creaked. The Admiral's gaze moved first to Harris. Held. Measured. Then past her. To Reardon. To the silver-haired civilian. To the 3 unknown officers. He did not look weak. He did not look disoriented. He looked like a man who had been listening. Slowly, deliberately, he lifted his right hand. Not shaking. Not uncertain. He reached up and removed the oxygen cannula himself. The monitor alarm began to chirp in protest at the interruption. Whitaker moved automatically toward the bed. "Sir, you shouldn't stand down, Colonel." The voice was rough from disuse, but it carried rank. Whitaker froze mid-step. Every spine in the room straightened instantly. The Admiral swung his legs over the side of the bed. The four-line tugged slightly before a corpsman rushed forward to adjust it, hands suddenly careful. No one had given permission for panic. No one dared. The Admiral planted his feet on the floor. Steady. No dizziness. No support needed. He stood. For stars invisible in hospital linens, but unmistakable in posture. The three unknown officers snapped to attention without being told. Reardon did the same. The silver-haired civilian inclined his head slightly. Harris stepped back, professional, composed. The Admiral's eyes returned to her. "You reported voluntary response," he said. "Yes, sir." "You refused to retract it." "Yes, sir." A faint pause. Then, "Good." The single word shifted the entire room. Whitaker's face drained of color. Reardon's jaw tightened, not in anger, in recalibration. The Admiral turned his attention to Whitaker. "You signed neurological confirmation within 6 hours." "Yes, Admiral," Whitaker said carefully. "You increased sedation levels on recommendation." "Yes, Admiral." Without independent counter-review. Whitaker swallowed. Neurology consensus indicated, "I am aware of what it indicated." No raised voice. No theatrics. Just quiet command. The Admiral's gaze swept the room. "I collapsed during a strategic intelligence briefing," he said. Within minutes, narrative control was implemented. No one spoke. "I required time." The words were simple. But the implication was not. The silver-haired civilian stepped forward half a pace. "Operational integrity has been maintained," he said. The Admiral nodded once. Then his eyes returned to Harris. "You recognized controlled suppression." She didn't answer immediately. "Yes, sir." "You chose restraint." "Yes, sir." He studied her for a long second, not as patient to nurse. "As senior officer to subordinate. You will document exactly what you observed. Nothing more. Nothing less." "Yes, sir." He turned toward Reardon. "Reinstate her primary authority over my medical oversight." Reardon responded without hesitation. "Yes, Admiral." Whitaker opened his mouth and closed it. The power dynamic didn't flip loudly. It inverted cleanly. In one breath. The Admiral adjusted the cuff of his hospital gown as if it were a dress uniform sleeve. "To be clear," he continued, voice steady, "this facility acted within procedural boundaries." Whitaker's shoulders eased a fraction. "But," the Admiral added, "protocol is not immunity." The words settled heavily. He stepped toward the glass wall overlooking the corridor. MPs snapped even straighter when they saw him standing. The news would travel in seconds. Not through press. Through rank. Through encrypted lines. Through men who understood what it meant when a 4-star chose stillness for 7 days. The Admiral turned back once more. "Dismissed," he said calmly. It wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. Whitaker moved first. Controlled. Precise. But diminished. Reardon followed. The intelligence officers exited without speaking. Within moments, the room was nearly empty. Only Harris remained. The Admiral regarded her in silence. "You felt it," he said. "Yes, sir." A slight nod. "Trust that." He retrieved the oxygen cannula from the bed and set it neatly on the tray. "I'll require a secure line to Washington in 15 minutes. "Yes, Admiral." As she moved to the door, she glanced back once. He was already standing taller. No monitors defining him now. No sedation narrative. Just command presence filling the space. Outside, staff who had once avoided her eyes now stepped aside automatically as she passed. No apology. No acknowledgement. Just immediate recalibration. Because in military culture, power does not argue. It reveals. And once revealed, everything else adjusts. By 0600, the hospital had returned to procedure. Not normal. Procedure. Doors that had remained closed for a week opened again. Restricted signage quietly removed. Civilian vehicles departed the secured garage without announcement. There was no public statement, no press release. The internal update was 4 lines long: Rear Admiral Vale, stabilized. Under continued evaluation. Operational status classified. Nothing about awakening. Nothing about 7 days of deliberate stillness. Harris reported to Level 5 at 0700. This time, no one questioned her badge. The MPs at the corridor entrance stepped aside automatically. Inside the room, the monitors were still connected, but their authority felt diminished. The Admiral sat upright in the bed, reviewing a secure tablet handed to him by the silver-haired civilian. He looked less like a patient and more like a man temporarily inconvenienced. Whitaker stood near the window. Not defensive. Not argumentative. Just contained. Reardon acknowledged Harris with a small nod as she entered. No one mentioned probation. No one mentioned written clarifications. Professional recalibration was underway. Vitals, Lieutenant Commander, the Admiral said without looking up. Yes, sir. She moved through the check methodically. Pulse steady. Blood pressure controlled. No tremor in his hands. No neurological lag in eye tracking. Medically sound. Strategically silent. When she finished, she stepped back. You maintained operational discipline, the Admiral said quietly, still focused on the tablet. That is noted. Yes, sir. Not praise. Documentation. The difference mattered. Outside the room, staff traffic increased. Word had traveled through command channels overnight. Not through rumor, through hierarchy. By mid-morning, 2 senior medical officers arrived from Washington. They reviewed charts. Asked measured questions. No accusations. But the air was formal. Whitaker answered carefully. He did not deflect blame. He did not justify. He simply described procedure as executed. Later, Harris was called into conference room B again. Same table. Different tone. Reardon sat at the head. A representative from Navy Medicine Command joined via secure screen. Your clinical observation has been reviewed, the representative said evenly. Your refusal to alter documentation is supported. Harris remained still. No further action will be taken regarding conduct. Translation. Probation lifted. Reardon folded his hands. However, this incident will not be discussed outside authorized channels. Yes, sir. Whitaker spoke next. His voice was controlled. Your assessment was correct, he said. My department operated on the information available at the time. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't dismissal either. It was institutional preservation. Harris nodded once. Understood, sir. The meeting ended without ceremony. No congratulations. No reprimands. Just adjustment. By afternoon, the Admiral had been moved from ICU to a secured private suite on the same floor. Still monitored. Still guarded. But no longer presented as neurologically lost. In surgical recovery, Alvarez approached her carefully. So, he asked. He's stable, she replied. That's it. That's it. He studied her face for a long moment, then gave a quiet nod. In the following days, subtle consequences unfolded. Whitaker retained his position. But oversight from Navy Medicine increased. Independent neurological reviews became mandatory for high-ranking officers. Documentation protocols were revised. Not publicly attributed, but implemented. Reardon's interactions with her shifted. More direct. Less corrective. He requested her presence in 2 additional high-level briefings regarding trauma response procedures. Measured trust. Not favoritism. Just acknowledgement of competence. The silver-haired civilian visited once more before departing. He found her reviewing charts at the nurse's station. You understand what you were looking at, he said. Yes. And you understand why stillness was necessary. She met his gaze. I understand timing, sir. A faint nod. Good. He left without offering a name. On the 7th day after the awakening, the Admiral walked the corridor under his own strength. No media. No announcement. Just controlled movement between rooms. Staff straightened automatically as he passed. When he reached her station, he stopped. Not long. Just enough. Lieutenant Commander, he said. Admiral. A beat of silence. Continue trusting what you observe. Yes, sir. He moved on. No handshake. No public commendation. But the message carried. That evening, Harris returned to her original rotation. Locker restored. Schedule normalized. The whispers that had once followed her faded into routine professionalism. Yet, something fundamental had shifted, not in rank, not in title. In perception. She wasn't untouchable. She wasn't elevated beyond her station. But she was no longer underestimated. Whitaker passed her in the hallway 2 days later. He paused. Clinical independence is valuable, he said evenly, when paired with restraint. Yes, sir. A mutual understanding. Not friendship. Not resentment. Just recalibrated respect. The hospital settled back into its rhythm. Sutures. Discharges. Routine codes. But occasionally, when elevators opened unexpectedly or civilian shoes echoed down the hall, staff remembered that week. How language changed. How security multiplied. How a diagnosis held the weight of more than medicine. And how a single refusal to falsify observation had altered the flow of authority without shouting, without spectacle. There were no medals. No ceremony. Just quiet correction in policy and posture. Which, in the military, often meant more. On her final shift of the week, Harris walked the stairwell again. Level 5 was calm now. Lights steady. No stagger in generators. She paused only briefly before descending. The building no longer felt like it was holding its breath. It had exhaled. And somewhere beyond the hospital walls, a 4-star Admiral resumed whatever strategy required 7 days of silence. Inside, discipline remained intact. Hierarchy remained intact. But so did something else. Integrity. And that carried its own weight. The hospital returned to rhythm the way oceans return to calm. Not suddenly. Gradually. Waves flattening until you almost forget there was a storm. Charts were filed. Rotations adjusted. Security presence thinned back to its standard configuration. The restricted signage disappeared as if it had never been bolted into the walls. Conversations shortened again, not from fear this time, but from discipline. In military spaces, disruptions are absorbed, not displayed. Rear Admiral Vale was transferred from the private suite on Level 5 3 weeks later. Officially, cleared for restricted duty. Unofficially, reassigned to a secure facility for strategic consultation. No ceremony accompanied his departure. No cameras waited outside the entrance. A black government sedan arrived before dawn, engine idling in quiet patience. He walked out under his own strength, saluted the MPs at the door, and left. That was the last time Harris saw him in person. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. For the staff at Bethesda, the week became something that was never spoken about directly. But it lived in subtle ways. Neurological review protocols changed. Documentation language tightened. Independent confirmations became mandatory for high-ranking admissions. Security integration with medical command was restructured under the justification of efficiency. No one announced that these policies were born from a single moment when a 4-star opened his eyes. They were presented as administrative evolution, which is how institutions protect themselves. Harris returned fully to trauma rotation within a month. Her schedule filled the way it always had. Fractures. Internal bleeding. Emergency surgeries that demanded focus without ego. She found comfort in it. Trauma medicine does not care about rank or politics. Blood loss is equal across uniforms. But something inside her had recalibrated. Not pride. Not fear. Perspective. She had witnessed the architecture of power from inside the walls. She had seen how quickly language shifts when authority is threatened. How silence can be used as a shield. How stillness can be more strategic than speech. And she had felt the weight of it press against her through nothing more than a restrained hand. There were moments, weeks later, when junior nurses approached her with small disagreements about protocol. Nothing dramatic. Charting disputes. Clarifications over medication timing. She noticed the hesitation in their posture. The careful tone. The instinct to yield before questioning. She understood that instinct now. Hierarchy is not loud in the military. It is constant. She didn't encourage defiance. She didn't reward insubordination. But she did ask them one quiet question whenever uncertainty appeared. What did you observe? Not what you think. Not what you feel. What did you observe? The distinction mattered. Observation requires discipline. Emotion does not. Colonel Whitaker remained chief of medicine. His posture never fully regained its previous edge, but it did not crumble either. He attended briefings with the same precision. He reviewed cases with the same scrutiny. If anything, he listened half a second longer before speaking. That half second was change. He and Harris rarely spoke beyond professional necessity. When they did, the tone was measured. Mutual recognition without warmth. No apology passed between them. In military culture, apology is rarely verbal. Correction is. And correction had occurred. Captain Reardon was reassigned within the year to a Joint Operations billet in Washington. His departure was announced formally in a staff bulletin. His replacement carried no knowledge of the week except what policy revisions documented. Institutional memory is selective, but human memory is not. On certain nights, when the hospital corridors quieted and fluorescent lights hummed without interruption, Harris would walk the stairwell again. Level 5 no longer carried tension. It smelled of antiseptic and recycled air like every other floor. Yet the concrete walls still held echoes for her. Not of voices, of restraint. The most powerful moment of that week had not been when the Admiral stood. It had been the seconds before. The choice to remain still. The decision to reveal power only when it served purpose. Authority, she realized, is not in volume. It is in control. She had once believed strength in the military was displayed through command presence, through decisive speech, through visible rank stitched onto colors. Now she understood something quieter. The Admiral had commanded the room long before he opened his eyes. Because he chose when to open them. Months passed. Life moved forward the way it always does in uniform, through rotations and reassignment orders, through briefings and deployment cycles. New crises replaced old ones. Younger officers arrived with sharp creases in their sleeves and certainty in their voices. Some of them carried ambition like a weapon. Others carried caution like armor. Harris recognized both. One evening, nearly a year later, a young ensign approached her in the supply corridor. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "if a senior physician dismisses a concern, when do you push back?" The question was earnest, unpracticed. She considered him for a moment. "Push back only on what you can document," she said. He nodded slowly. "And if that costs you?" She met his eyes. "It might." No dramatic reassurance followed. No guarantee of protection. Because that wasn't honest. Integrity is not safe. It is steady. The Admiral's name surfaced occasionally in defense briefings broadcast on internal networks. Strategic advisory roles. Classified operations hinted at but never detailed. His image appeared once in a secure publication, older, composed, unchanged. No mention was made of the week in Bethesda. The silence remained intact. And yet, for those who had stood in that room at 0412, silence meant something different now. It meant capacity. It meant patience. It meant timing. Harris kept the sealed envelope that had summoned her back upstairs. Not as a trophy. Not as evidence. As reminder. Authority can be misused. But it can also be measured. The difference lies in restraint. On her final shift before transferring to a forward-deployed medical unit overseas, she visited Level 5 one last time. No clearance was required anymore. It was just another floor. She stood outside the room that had once held the weight of Washington and war strategy. The glass walls reflected only her own uniform now. No suited observers. No intelligence officers. Just fluorescent light. She rested her palm briefly against the rail of an empty bed. No pressure met her hand. No deliberate stillness answered. Only memory. In the military, stories like that week do not circulate widely. They are not shared in mess halls or printed in commendation citations. They exist in posture. In the extra pause before a senior officer dismisses a junior voice. In the slight recalibration of language during briefings. in the understanding that rank commands obedience, but integrity commands respect. She turned toward the stairwell, descended without hesitation. Outside, the Chesapeake wind cut sharp across the parking lot, dawn breaking pale over the water, the world indifferent to what had unfolded within concrete walls. She inhaled once, steady. Somewhere beyond her line of sight, decisions were still being made by men and women who understood the cost of timing. And somewhere in that understanding was the memory of a week when a 4-star Admiral lay perfectly still while the world shifted around him, and a junior officer refused to pretend she hadn't felt the truth in her palm. Power had not shouted. It had waited. And in waiting, it had revealed exactly who deserved to carry it. She adjusted her cover against the wind and walked toward the future without looking back. Because in the end, respect in the military is not granted by rank alone. It is earned in the quiet moments when no one is certain you are watching and you choose to stand steady anyway.